Annabel, very good morning to you.
Good morning, Mike. How are you?
Very well indeed, very well. Feeling chipper, full of the joys of spring. I mean, we're going to get rid of all the people that we don't like in society, who are nasty, horrible, racist people, and we're going to sort them out. But as far as July the 19th is concerned, it seems to me that Boris has finally woken up and worked out, actually, the people would like to return to normal.
If I'm being honest with you, Mike, I felt more optimistic that Boris had reclaimed his buccaneering spirit. About a week ago, I
Mm.
was quite pleased when Matt Hancock stood down as health secretary and we had Sajid Javid taking over, and he was making a lot of the right noises about the need to reopen our economy, reopen our society. But last night's press conference has made me feel a little nervous about what's going to happen after the 19th of July. We're hearing a lot of noises about urging businesses to do something,
Mm.
expecting individuals to wear their masks, to social distance, advising companies, pubs, venues to enforce some of these non-pharmaceutical interventions. And if the government's asking you to do something, that sounds a lot to me like a law. It sounds like businesses are going to respond positively to the government and start enforcing face masks, start enforcing social distancing, perhaps trying to break up large groups of people gathering. And I'm starting to wonder really how different life is going to be on the 20th of July from how it is
Mm.
now.
Except I take your point, and I know what you mean. But equally, I think they also know in Downing Street that it's one thing to say you must do it. It's another thing to say, would you mind doing it? Because I think what they realise is going to happen is that most people who are sick to death of all this nonsense will not do it. And if you try to make them do it, they'll just go, well, if it's not the law, you can get lost.
Well, I certainly hope that that's the case. And I agree with the principle of allowing businesses to decide who to let onto their premises. If
Mm.
they want to enforce vaccine certificates or face masks, then they ought to be able to do that. This is freedom of association. And if they're going to enforce face masks, then perhaps we could apply that same logic to other areas. Why not have pub landlords decide whether people are allowed to smoke, for instance? We
Yeah.
know smoking ban in pubs that was introduced in 2007 absolutely decimated the pub
Mm.
industry. I think over the 8 years after that, about 7,000 pubs closed. So, if only we could apply those rules across a range of areas. But I hope, like you, that most business owners, most shop owners, most pub landlords will decide that they don't want to enforce the rules, that they'll just allow anybody onto their
Yeah.
premises and
I
and
mean,
we
we
can
know,
go back
yeah.
to
I mean,
normal.
there's a bunch of people called the City Group of pubs, which seems to me to be a bit of a sort of gastro yuppie chain of pubs, with pubs in places like Streatham and Clapham and Lavender Hill and that kind of thing. And they're all saying that we're going to keep the masks in place. The Gaucho chain of restaurants, rare restaurants, are going to keep them as well. That's fine. I won't go there. I won't give them my money, and neither will an awful lot of other people. But there may be other people who go, oh, that makes me feel safe, so I'll go out and do that. And that's fine, but in the end, it's sort of creating a two-tier society, and I would rather that nobody did it. If it's no longer required, why would you insist on something? It's like saying to somebody, in order to come into my restaurant, you must wear a jacket and tie. Now, some places do that. But it's considered to be a bit old-fashioned. But if we're going to go back to that kind of view, I mean, you could have all sorts of, ridiculous rules, like we only allow people who are left-handed into this restaurant, or, we only allow Catholics into this restaurant, or, it's not a very healthy way to live, is it?
Well, that would be very sinister indeed, Mike. And I agree, but then I think that most business owners are thinking of the bottom line. They will respond to consumer needs and consumer appetites. To your point about those venues wanting to keep face masks in place, I mean, the mask theatre that you get in pubs and bars and restaurants is completely absurd. For an airborne virus,
Yeah.
why patrons need to put a mask on when they go to the WC, but they don't need to wear it at the table? I mean, it's these sorts of rules that have really eroded public trust in the government to make good
Mm.
decisions throughout the pandemic.
I think so. And also to make it a kind of do it if you want or don't do it if you don't want scenario. Sainsbury's have already come out and said that they don't mind what you do. They'll let you in to their shop if you're not wearing a mask, or if you are. It does, because of the way human nature operates, it does suggest that there might be a few kind of, shall we say, disagreements between the general public as well, doesn't it?
I think we're going to have trolley wars, Mike. I really do. You talked about a two-tier society. I think we're going to have a very polarized society where you'll have those who choose to stick to some of the measures that have been in place over the past few months, giving sort of withering looks to those and tutting. Can you imagine? Those who've decided that they value their freedom and they don't want to wear a face covering because, quite frankly, masks are an inconvenience. They're uncomfortable to wear. They affect your ability to communicate. And, the evidence suggests that they do very little to mitigate the transmission of the virus anyway. And when we've had this phenomenal vaccine rollout, we don't need measures like that in place anymore.
No, I used to be, reasonably shall we say, willing to be okay about wearing them in supermarkets and wearing them on public transport. I've not been on public transport for a while, but I mean, lately I'm just not wearing one at all. I've been into several shops, I've been into several shopping centres. I was in one yesterday to pick up my dry cleaning, and normally I would put the mask on, even though I was only walking 50 yards. I just didn't do it. And nobody said anything, and nobody cared. And the people who were wearing masks didn't look at me in a weird way, and if they did, I wouldn't care about that either.
Well, I think if you tell the public that you're going to remove a particular measure in a week's time, most people will just take matters into their own hands.
Yeah.
And anybody who's read a newspaper in the past few days and has seen scenes from Leicester Square during the Euro final, where social distancing and all of these interventions were being completely disregarded, many people will think, well, why bother?
Yeah.
But then on the other side, Mike, of course, we had that Ipsos Mori poll about 5 days ago showing that 40% of people support the continued wearing of face masks and think that they ought to be mandatory. 26% of people want casinos and nightclubs to be...
I mean, I don't know where they're finding these people. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know where they're finding these people. But, let's face it, 48% of people wanted to remain in the European Union, and we left anyway. So why would we pay any attention to any of these people who say they want to keep these restrictions? And when you see Patrick Vallance at Wimbledon at the weekend, finals day, sitting there quite happily with Alok Sharma, I mean, basically, here's a guy who is working with Chris Whitty, who says if you're in a public place which is crowded, you should wear a mask. He's not wearing one.
And yet some of the Wimbledon staff have to wear masks. It does back to that one rule for them and another rule for everyone else, and the way in which senior figures or those who have access or those who are wealthy have been able to find loopholes and dodge some of the rules so that their existence over the past 6 months has been entirely more pleasant than...
Well, Boris Johnson and Tom Cruise managed to go to Wimbledon and the Euro finals both in the same day. Now, that would, I suggest, give you a reasonable amount of exposure to an awful lot of people. I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but, they can't tell us then not to do it.
Well, no, I completely agree. I think that the public are tiring of the hypocrisy that we're seeing from some government ministers. We've had it, of course, with Matt Hancock and his breach of the rules that he himself helped to bring into force. We had it with Neil Ferguson, countless examples of senior figures setting some of the legislation that has affected all of our lives, dampened our joie de vivre, and yet they're not actually adhering to them themselves. It's been extremely frustrating, and I think it will have damaged public trust in some of our leaders.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. But I mean, I remain optimistic. I'll try and convince you to be as optimistic as I am, Annabel, by the time the 19th comes around. And perhaps we'll have to meet up and go on some kind of jolly down the river on a big boat with loads of people who want to take their masks off. It could be fun. Annabel Denham from the IEA, Institute of Economic Affairs, thank you very much.